Hello, here with Jimmy the pug. Say hi, Jimmy. We're here to talk about poetry, the length of the line. Okay, go find your toy, my little puppy. So I want to start tonight by quoting a little bit from this wonderful book, Helen Vendler's Poems, Poets, Poetry. I think I mentioned it before. And for those of you who want to keep going in your poetry practice, this is a good one to have on the shelf. It's a big tome. But I just want to read this paragraph from Helen Vendler about the poem as arranged life. The poem as life suggests that poems originate in crucial moments of private life, for instance, marriage, or public life, for instance, a revolutionary era, which we hope we're in now, and that they are set in recognizable places, in a junkyard, for example, or times in spring, for example. But to speak of the poem as life is not to say that it is simply a transcription of what has occurred. Life itself is a continuation of successive moments in one stream. Art interrupts the stream and constructs one segment or level of the stream for processing. In a single act, it describes, analyzes, and confers form on that segment. The form it confers by its ways of organizing the poem makes visible the contour of that life moment as the poet perceives it. The poet discovers the emotional import of that life moment by subjecting it to analysis. The analysis then determines how the moment is described and the invented organizational form that replicates it. I'll just say that one more time. The poet discovers the emotional import of that life moment by subjecting it to analysis. The analysis then determines how the moment is described and the invented organizational form that replicates it. This will become clear as we look at particular poems, and this week we'll be talking about 4 really different poems that use line length really differently, depending on the context and the voice, the speaker, and the situation of the poem. So hopefully these remarks become clear when we look at particular poems to see how a poem is arranged. That is, in what way are the formal constrictions, in what way are these different poems formal constructions of life? What organizational patterns have the poets chosen? So we will be looking at 4 very different poems after we read the Oliver chapter on the length of the line and how we control that. We're still talking about free verse. Next week we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the given forms. But if you're working in free verse, you have a lot of power. You have a lot of control over the length of the line, right? And where you break your line is really important. The reader's eye will naturally go to the end of the line and the beginning of the next line. So you have, we're going to read a very still and reflective poem, Fog, by Amy Clampitt, which, in my opinion, uses form and line length to mimic this, the activity of fog and the layers of fog, the way in which the poet sees this phenomenon in nature in front of her, and very beautiful poem, a still poem with a stillness about it at its core. Ave Maria, not a still poem, a fun and crazy poem, Frank O'Hara. Kind of don't know why I put this one in here, except that it's using the line break and also the not just the line break, but indentation to move lines around and take up the whole entire page. And the short lines are the shortest lines in the poem are, but what about the soul? They won't hate you. Up in their room, hating you. And seeing is the shortest line in the poem. So these are choices that were made by O'Hara at the time of writing that poem. Starlight Scope Myopia, great, unforgettable poem by Yusef Komunyakaa, in which the speaker is Vietnam veteran who's experiencing, in my opinion, post-traumatic stress disorder in this specific, very specific and haunting way. But the voice, the lines are short, the stanzas are short, and the effect is that this voice is really tortured, really going through some pain about what has occurred in the past. Realize the moon figures in 3 of these poems this week that we're looking at. And this is one of them at the very end, Kuminyaka, seeing the full moon loaded on an ox cart, which in any other context wouldn't mean anything, but it's in the context of this poem that starts, gray blue shadows lift shadows onto an ox cart. So it loops back at the end to the ox cart at the beginning, and what happens in between is partly using that heavily enjambed and short line to explore this speaker's pain and his memories. And lastly, we'll be going to Ginsberg, Ginsbergian, long, just seemingly out of control lines, but Ginsberg did edit his work. When people think about him as just kind of standing up and letting it go. But they found his journals, and he was very thoughtful, and he thought these things through. But this is a poem that I really love. My favorite moment, where are we going, Walt Whitman? The doors close in an hour. Which way does your beard point tonight? And there's just some great moments in this poem. So, and when I get to the end of this poem, I think it's a very moving tribute to Walt Whitman, one gay male poet, paying tribute to another predecessor, gay male poet in Whitman. Ah, dear father, graybeard, lonely old courage teacher, what America did you have when Charon quit poling his ferry and you got out on a smoking bank and stood watching the boat disappear on the black waters of Lethe? Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. What did you see when you were crossing over, Mr. Whitman? And there's a little audio file so you can hear Ginsberg reading his very famous poem, A Supermarket in California. There you have it. Let's meet in Zoom at 6 o'clock Tuesday to talk about sound. And if you care to, we could look at some of your poems. We looked at Ashley, and we looked at Charles, and we looked at Annie's poems last week. So if you're there and you would like us to look at your poem in the Zoom, let's do that. In the meantime, keep writing your free verse and exploring your voice, and this week using that line break to experiment and to see what happens when you break it at a different spot. Adios.